Well, good evening and welcome to Homegrown here on LTV. My name is Harry Wareing. I have the pleasure of interviewing and chatting with some really talented performers right here on the East End of Long Island. And tonight's joined by Joe Delia. Joe, how are you?
I'm good, Harry.
This is really nice. You know, it's funny. The first time I met you, I think it was at the station in Watermill, and a salesperson came over to me and was convinced you were Mick Jagger. Right. And I had to talk her down and be like, no, that's Joe Delia. But it's funny. Do you get recognized, or what is that like? Because I can see the resemblance.
Yeah, I think nowadays out here,
they know Joe.
People recognize me. You know,
it's kind of cool. The thing about you is that you are kind of this quintessential, I don't want to say rock star musician, but you've lived this amazing life. And you've worked with so many cool people. So thank you for sitting down with us tonight. This is awesome.
That's right. We know each other from...
It was a long time ago. And it was just funny because I was like, no, that's Joe. And you guys, I think it was right when the Thieves Project that came out, when you had some songs and you were working.
Exactly right.
It's great to get back in the studio and chat with you. I wanted to go back a little bit. And the nice thing about Homegrown is I kind of like to learn where people come from. But how long have you been out here on the East End of Long Island?
Really I guess it's getting on 25 years.
Wow. Now
I married a Montauk girl in '95, and that really.
When did you first come out to Montauk? Was it because of Abel Ferrara? I think I read that.
Actually, Abel had a place out here. I don't know. It would have been sometime maybe '87 or something like that, and they were renting a place in Hither Hills, and we came out and fell in love with Montauk. I had been in Montauk once before in the '70s, and it was like a Hither Hills campground, which for me is not, camping is not really my forte. But we came out, we had dogs with us, and they wouldn't allow the dogs in the park. We had to drive back to Noyak, and it was a whole thing. And then it rained, and that was the first introduction to Montauk, and then maybe 10, 15 years later, came back. Abel and his family were renting a house, and then that was really the
kind of fell in love, and literally fell in love with Montauk. And
fell in love with Montauk, and then built a house up there in Hither Hills, and then my whole life kind of was upended at that point at '95, and then I met PJ right in '95, and it's been
here ever since,
ongoing. Since, so that's really, I think, where the relationship with the East End really kicked in.
You really have become such an integral part of the music scene out here, which
it's been wonderful. PJ for years was saying, you got to play, you got to start playing in the Hamptons. And I was like, yeah, well, how do you do that? When I first met her in '95, I was doing a couple of gigs here and there. The Memory Motel, we would go in and bring a band in, like in that summer in '95 once or twice. But I wasn't playing out here at all. I was doing all the film work, and I really didn't know anybody. And it wasn't until I came back in maybe 2010 and then brought the Thieves Band, which you just mentioned, out here. And then we started playing gigs, and that's kind of where.
You have such an interesting resume, so to speak, of different projects along the way. And I'm curious in a way, because of course film scores, we'll talk about that, but let's actually go back. When did you first learn to play the piano? How old were you?
Not early.
Really?
Maybe maybe age 12.
What kind of triggered to take? Did you take lessons? Or?
Yeah, and our next door neighbor was a piano teacher. She was I think a science teacher in Spring Valley. This was up by Nyack. We were living in Pearl River, so Rockland County, right? She was next door neighbor. She was a very old woman with 20 cats, and it was very traditional piano training. But it wasn't really until I was 12 that I ever sat down at the piano. I think when the first inkling that I had was an instrument was brought into the house when I was maybe 10. So I think it was a dream of my mom's to buy a Steinway, as it were, and they went to Steinway Hall on 57th Street, and it wasn't a Steinway; it was an Everett upright, which was kind of the lowest end instrument in
At the
Steinway Hall, but they bought it, and she brought it back. And I can remember when it came into the house, looking at this thing for maybe 2 years and going, I'm not sure what it is, but I think I could do something with it. I had this kind of
You kind of knew that
this
eventually
vibe
you'd get
that-
around to figuring it out.
Right. And then at 12, I started taking lessons next door, and I was picking up on it pretty quickly, I think, but it was still 12, so it wasn't, I didn't have a good
What was it
head
like?
start.
You mentioned the number 12, and I have to ask, what was it like to grow up with, I think, 12 siblings?
Yeah.
Where were you in that
And
relationship? Older or young?
I was number 4.
Was that, did you have older siblings that were into music?
Yeah.
Or,
And my oldest brother, Alfred, being the firstborn in an Italian family, played the accordion and was really good, and skilled on this instrument, and really close to virtuoso level, and really, he just played so great. And I saw him playing, and he started showing me some piano things. Of course, he was an accordionist, so he didn't have a full
the full range.
conceptual thing going for the piano, but he knew chords and he knew fingering and stuff. And I started working with his teacher, who was really a piano teacher. So I left the original teacher. We went with him. Art Cunningham, his name was, who was he was a wonderful guy who, my family was so nutty, because there was 13 of us.
Well, I can't imagine what it's like to have that many siblings and running around, and I guess trying to get attention and trying to just get people to pay it.
Yeah, for me, getting attention, that's a really great
I can't imagine. And in using and I was curious when you took lessons, if you took it away from the house, because of your chance to kind of get away from the
What
craziness.
happened was when Art Cunningham came in, and he was this wonderful guy, African American, thin, pencil mustache. He must have been about 30. So if I was 13 at that point, 12 or 13, he came in and he was like this nutty kind of New York hipster guy, which was great in this wacky family that I grew up in. And Al was playing accordion, and I was now playing piano. And he was like, "You guys have to have a band." He was the one who kind of
gave you the idea,
gave us the idea, and then Michael went and just got a snare drum and brushes, and then Frank, who was third, so Al was the oldest, Michael was second, Frank was third, I was fourth, right? And we had a band. So by 1962, we were out playing gigs, and I had been playing all of, Harry, maybe a year and a half, and I was now I was in hardcore joints.
What was it like? Because it was a family in a way. It is with your family. Was it tougher? Was it easier? Because I imagine it's great that you know each other and you're so close, but it's got to be a little difficult too.
Yeah, but there was no frame of reference.
That's true. Yeah.
In '62, there weren't. It was pre-Beatle invasion, which was really cool.
You were just having fun with your brothers.
Yeah, because before the Beatles, kids didn't have bands, and we were about a year or two before that curve, which was really cool. So we were out when the Beatles hit in '63. We had already been playing gigs, and we had an act. We had really cool equipment and uniforms and costumes and this whole thing. We were.
What inspired you guys? What were you listening to and watching that kind of created your look and sound?
It was really Mr. Cunningham who was kind of guiding.
Crafting. Okay.
He was kind of guiding the repertoire early on.
Yeah.
So we were playing. We were playing some interesting material. Autumn Leaves and. Gershwin things and Cole Porter and stuff like that, and boogie woogie things from the 30s, with the original repertoire. But then we started playing Elvis tunes and kind of cover tunes from the 50s, because we kind of Little Richard and Fats Domino and that stuff. We were actually playing in the original repertoire of the Delia brothers. When the Beatles hit in '63, I just remember my brother Mike he won scholarship to one of the Jesuit high schools in the city, right? And he came in and he was like, "You guys are not." It was 1963.
Yeah.
You guys are not going to believe this stuff, right? And it was the Beatles. It was the day the Beatles hit, and that was the game changer right there. But we already had a head start.
Yeah.
You know,
when did you feel, you said you started playing piano when you were 12,
Right.
around there. When did you start really feeling comfortable on the stage and kind of growing as a player?
I you know, a born ham, you know, so I was pretty
You were already
comfortable
there,
right
yeah.
away. And we would do all kinds of things. We would do variety shows. We played, you know, in those days, pre-Beatles. Even after, of course, after that, you know, if you had a band, you were, and were pretty good, you were playing. You know, we were playing gigs, right? But
And you
we
were a
would,
teenager.
yeah,
going to these
and
clubs and
a
performing.
young teenager,
Yeah.
13, 14. But we would do like variety shows, and we would be like cast to do little comedy routines, a little, you know, I don't want to say interstitial, but that's what they were, you know, like between the act
Yeah.
routines where it would be like these pyramid things. And I was always, because I was such a shrimp, you know, I would be the one who was at the top of the pyramid waving the flag, and then the whole pyramid would collapse and that kind of thing.
But that's funny. That's interesting. It kind of does. It was like a precursor to everything you've done over the years because you are involved in so many different, and just more entertainment, really.
Man,
if you
it's
wanna,
been a diverse
when you want to
run for me. You know, it's all been about, you know, in a way about survival, and I think growing and learning and wearing a lot of different hats. You know, it's always been piano playing has always been sort of at the heart of everything that I've done. But I think over time, if I wanted to survive in this field, I had to do everything from play the piano to learn how to orchestrate and write arrangements, and then working with composition and learning my theory and getting my chops together. It's been a very interesting journey, learning how to engineer, which is not my great love, but you do it because sometimes you have to.
That's a great point. Well,
And then learning how to write songs and write lyrics and whatever.
being so young, and you were touring in a way around the East Coast and doing different shows. How did you hook up with the Beatles manager along the way? When did that happen?
That was kind of with the evolution of the band with my brothers.
Yeah.
Originally, we were the Delia brothers. So in high school, and you still can go back to Pearl River, New York, and there are some people my age who will ask about the Delia
That's
brothers,
great.
who remember it from back then. I think once the Beatles came in, we were like, okay, we're going to go from looking like and this reference will be lost on most of your fans, like the Brothers Four or something, you know, or one of these acts that was very clean cut,
Yeah.
and we wore sweaters, we had matching, and then we got a little flashier, but we still had hair that was slicked back or short, right? And once the Beatles came in, it was like, okay, we started growing our hair long. And I think with that act, and with all due respect to the talented people that I was playing with, which were my brothers, and they all talented guys, we had a look that worked because we were four young guys. I mean, I was 14, 15. My brother Al would have been maybe 19, right? And we kind of all looked the same, sort of like I look now, except 100 years ago, right? And I think the look really helped us out, right? And Sid Bernstein discovered us, you know, along the way, you know, and teamed up with my dad, Alfred, and there was a couple of year run with Bernstein, I think, that served us well. He got us with RCA Records, and we did our thing until just about 68, 67. Things started going off the rails. But we had been around for 5 years at that point, I would say.
What'd you learn, if you look back at that time, what was the one thing that you really took out of that, that kind of set up the next few steps for you?
It was, it's a great question, because it was very tough between, I had more good luck, I think, in music when I was a teenager than, say, at 20. I could play in bars and stuff, and I was getting that kind of work, and I didn't really want it. I wanted to work in the studios. I had some experience doing it as a kid, so I knew the feeling of being at this piano in a recording studio, sort of like what we're doing now. And that's what I wanted. But it was almost unattainable, and they taught in that period, the people that I knew or who knew about it referred to it as the clique. And they said, you can't get into the clique in Manhattan, in New York. That's where it is, and you can't get in. And it, as luck would have it, in that period, so my early 20s were, I was playing and I was working, but it was tough, and it's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a studio musician, really. And A&R Studios in Manhattan built what was like a satellite studio in Blauvelt, New York, which was a couple of towns over. And it was right on Route 303. It was like it wasn't part of a strip mall, but it was just this rectangular building that happened to be a state-of-the-art recording studio, right, in this little hometown of ours, right? And it's where Springsteen recorded, I think, his first 2 albums. And there was one hit after the other being made, like right next door. So that became sort of the
what drew you to wanting to be more of a studio musician?
What
would appeal to that side of it instead of?
I'm not sure, but I thought that I could play the piano, and I knew about studio musicians. I knew about Floyd Kramer, even though I wasn't sure of the name. I knew that there was some guy like Floyd Kramer who was, playing. I could hear those licks coming through on the radio, or Fats Domino, who wasn't a studio musician, but I could play that. And I knew that if I could play that feel,
you can get into.
I could maybe work, but it was tough getting in. And then I think because the studio in Blauvelt, 914 it was called, opened up, and I got a foot in the door there. And then from there, I worked my way into the clique, but I had to come kind of from the back door because it was such a closed union shop.
It's interesting.
There was no way of getting in. And what I did was I started studying arranging and orchestration. And I thought that if I could become an arranger, then I could arrange the gigs and call the musicians that I wanted in, and also play if I wanted to, right? And that really did work out, So I studied arranging with a guy named Don Sebesky, who was a great jazz arranger, and he did this like master class in Manhattan. And the best musicians everywhere were in class. Hubert Laws would be sitting next to me, Michael Brecker, Randy Brecker, all these guys, John Tropea and David Spinoza, all these cats, who were heavy New York guys, were in the arranging class. And I tell you, Harry, I came out of that master class after whatever it was, a year, and I started getting gigs as an arranger, which was shocking to me. It was great. So then I could work with the contractor, contract the musicians I wanted, and play piano if I could. A lot of times you'd be directing and conducting the session. But I had wonderful arranging work where I was like calling in 30 musicians and walking into the session, and I was the guy. So it wasn't, I think if I was coming in only as a piano player, it wasn't the way it was going to happen. But unfortunately, that era in New York City ended. So if that was mid to late 70s, by the mid 80s, it was on its way out. The whole.
In a way, you kind of have to not reinvent yourself, but look for another lane. And
Yeah,
it sounds
and
like
then
you're
it
really
was,
good at doing
right,
that.
Exactly.
I'm curious, just to go back for 1 second, what happened with your brothers? How did that end? And are they, were they still doing music? And
we had one good situation after the other. We had, RCA signed us up, and we did the first record. It's so funny. A scrapbook fell off the shelf the other day, and it opened up to a Billboard chart from, I guess, 66 or something. And Bad Way to Go, which was the tune, what actually hit the Billboard charts in 1966. It didn't go that high, but we were in the top 100 or something. So we were content. We could have been contenders with the brothers. And then the second group of sessions, because RCA brought us in, and they now wanted to, again, a reference that will be lost on your fans. The Cowsills were another family act who had big hits, right? And they kind of wanted to pattern, we were now called the Brothers with a U. They wanted to pattern us more after that. And we were in RCA studios. It was really a wonderful period in time. You would walk through those halls and, on one session there would be, I don't know, Neil Diamond, and Barbra Streisand. These sessions were going on as, kids, we would walk through them and, God, there's Neil Diamond, there's an orchestra over there, and there's all the resources were there. The best songwriters in New York City, the best studio musicians and vocalists, and RCA wanted to do that with the Delia brothers, and we were like, we're not buying it. Where, we had this idealistic 60s thing. We write our own stuff and we do it. And we did the second session, and that was, I think, the beginning of the end. If we had allowed them to write our songs and
you wanted control
and bring studio
or some level of it,
and, but it was a really great run, and I think especially with Bernstein, there were lots of good situations and a tremendous learning experience, and it was somewhat successful.
And it's interesting to see how what you learned there kind of got you taught you how to find that lane to get in the back door, so to speak, of other opportunities.
Yes, right, because there were experiences, there were
being at such a young age too, and learning those lessons.
Because exactly, Harry. There were gigs where it was like, you were asking how did I know or think that I wanted to play piano in the studios. I think there were times where we would get called to write a jingle or a spot or something, and we'd be put into a studio, and I would have to play. So I got that feeling of what it was like to be in a studio, and I liked it. There was something very alluring about the idea of walking into a recording studio and the piano is mic'd up and you're hearing yourself and you're playing, and it was just something that I wanted to do. Nowadays, of course, we're all studio musicians where, the uniqueness is gone.
It's different now, is really with the technology and everything. When you look back and you were kind of starting, what was one of the first things you scored as far as
Wow. I think the first thing that I scored was had to have been Abel's first films. The first three, the very first one was called 9 Lives, Driller Killer was second, and Ms. 45 was third. And I had been introduced to Abel Ferrara it had to be, I don't know, like 73 or 70, maybe 75.
Oh, wow, that long
and I was
ago.
starting to work in the studio. So, I was still operating like I wanted to be a a studio musician,
Yeah.
right? And an arranger, So I was making, a certain amount of disco records and stuff uptown, and I was now introduced to Abel, who had come through Rockland County and was a friend of my brother Frank, but he was now in the city and becoming a presence there, and was making films. And it was really, I think, the introduction to Abel Ferrara that took me into the realm of film writing. I had no experience at all with it. I had nothing, had no knowledge of it at all. But I was starting to write, so I had a little bit of a handle on some orchestration and some composition knowledge. I think.
When you were starting, what was one of the things that I'm curious, because like you said you had no experience doing it. What was one of the first things you learned about it that surprised you when you were filming, when you were doing a score for a film?
I think it was and it's very obvious, to look at the picture and try and disseminate what the emotional feel. Try to get a handle on what is trying to be said emotionally, and then connecting with that.
How far into the process of the film do you get to kind of start that?
We started talking about that earlier, about how long it takes to do things and what the process is. And I think that different from director to director, of course. I mean, Abel and I, because we've been doing this for so long, we have our own process, and it is not necessarily linear. It's not necessarily logical or the way it's normally done, and probably isn't. But it really works for us. In other words, it's not the traditional way of a composer working with a film is that the film is shot and it goes into the editing room and they get a rough cut, and then when it's a little better than a rough cut, they start saying, well, what about a composer? And when it's getting towards the final cut, they send it out to the composer, and then the composer goes in and he meets with the director and all the producers, and they sit there with a clipboard and they do what they call a spotting session, and they say, well, on such and such a time and place, we're going to put the cue in here, it's going to start here, it's going to end there. That is a typical way of scoring a film, and I've done many films that were done that way, and it's a very kind of linear way of doing it. I think with Abel, it's so organic that, and music is so integral to the film itself. It's not just there. It's not just there to enhance it. It's really part of the makeup of the film.
It's vital to the whole.
It's really vital, and I think music is vital to film. I think that it really depends, Harry. It depends on the project and the film. If I've done a lot of television documentary work, and that stuff is almost always done the way I described it, with spotting session, and they say, boom, 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 boom. This is where it's going. Write these cues, and then you come up with it. Siberia, which we were talking about earlier, which was not the last film that I did with Abel, but
how many have you done with him?
The next to last film. That
quite a few. How many have you done with Abel Ferrara?
Oh God, man, I haven't counted up. It's probably maybe 10 or 15 films. It's been a large part of the body of work, I think.
He was part of the reason, actually, you came out to Montauk, if I'm not mistaken. When did you meet him, and what kind of drew you guys together as friends and to be able to be collaborators?
I think it was, Abel is, I think that he's a very good songwriter and singer. And I think it was part of his DNA to be a musician, to be a working musician. And I think he ended up directing films. I think he had such a calling for being a director that he ended up primarily as a director and secondarily as a musician, right? So I think that we probably connected on that fact that, you know, he was in bands when he was a kid like I was, you know, so I was probably, you know, he probably looked at me like, you know, like one of the brothers, you
As
know,
a
like
peer, yeah.
and the same with me. So we connected I think we connected right away. It took a while before I got to know him because he was now like this kind of downtown guy, and I was like sort of this I was trying to be this button down studio musician, and I would go down to the loft on 18th Street, and it was like all these wild people and this crazy artistic scene. But Abel taught me how to do it. You know, you were asking about the process. We would, you know, the earlier films were actually more like the process I described, where the film was cut and I was coming in.
Yeah.
Ms. 45, which was the third film, that was really pretty much in a final cut. And it was like, okay, we need cues here. And we wrote some really, really nice music for that. It's been a wonderful journey with Abel Ferrara and a learning experience all the way down the line. You know, Siberia is a wonderful film. We also
Siberia is the new one that actually just came out.
Siberia is the one just released now. This is the one that was completed right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was barely released in Europe. The pandemic hit, and then they did some kind of streaming thing on it, and now I think it's Lionsgate picked it up and released it in the United States. You asked about the theme to it.
Yeah, I'm glad we have the piano. Let's hear a little bit from. This is from Siberia.
I'll play like 2 seconds of it if I can.
Please, more than that.
Yeah. There's a little variation on how the film starts out, right? And then we hear that a few times. It was interesting on the score of Siberia. The direction was not. We didn't want to do anything that was literal musically, but we had this one theme that was kind of literal. Those notes.
Just hearing the name Siberia, you can almost hear the music come from that.
Yes, right. So it's like the music itself is so subtle. You know, I mean, there are a couple of big spots. You know, and I won't, you know, spoiler alert. I won't tell you what they are that are really scored and like dramatic scoring. But a lot of it is just this beautiful textural stuff that's coming in and out. And once in a while we hear a theme, right? Body Snatchers there were a couple of, one of the films, and it was really one of the few real studio films. So it was a Warner Brothers film, and it was a remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This would have been maybe 1990, and that had a cool, you know, orchestral and kind of really nice score. That was one that I was very happy with, and I'll play a little of that theme.
Sure.
of it, right?
You have done, that's amazing. You've done so many different types of projects too, and Abel's work tends to be a little dark,
Right.
To say the least, with some of the like Bad Lieutenants and King of New York.
Yeah,
And,
right. Yes.
What's it like to have to kind of put yourself, how do you, when you're talking about and kind of creating the score, how do you get your mindset there? Is it difficult at times, or you watch the film obviously, but
Yeah, I think with film, you do have that that element of, in terms of what sparking the creativity. You
kind of want to be the character
Yeah,
almost.
right, exactly. You have the film that's in a way dictating what needs to be done. Whereas when you're writing a song, it's like, okay, where do you start?
How often did you play the piano? Because I'm curious. There's got to be different ways you do it, because there's the work version of it, and then there's kind of the just watching you play is a lot of fun to watch. Your hands and the emotion that goes into it. How often do you play just for fun?
I play a lot, and I think that part of the experience of being out here and playing is about playing,
Yeah.
Harry. This is really, I think it's a gift to be able to play.
To get the piano to speak in a way through your hands and to tell that story is really impressive.
Playing is wonderful, and I think that I like your question about how often do you play.
Yeah.
It depends. It depends on what I'm doing. I like to think of I think of myself as a pro in certain styles, and in certain areas, when it comes to playing Bach, I'm no Glenn Gould, but I love to play it, and I think of myself as an amateur Bach player. And I'm not going to play any Bach for you right now because I haven't practiced exactly what I would play. But I do play Bach. I put the stuff up and I sight read it as well as I can just to keep my chops together.
I know you've done Nova in different documentaries. Yeah. I'm curious, one that stuck out to me. This was early on, I believe, with the Muppets.
The Muppets.
How did you get involved with that? Because
and that was
speaking of dark with Abel, and then
that was
the
also a Sid Bernstein thing, and it was one of my early credits, and it always comes up out here.
Yeah, no, how could it not?
And it's funny because PJ had mentioned it years ago, probably when we met somewhere in that period, and people out here picked up on it as something
timeless,
as something interesting, and it was an early credit that I had kind of forgotten about, and I don't think I could play the song. I could play. I don't know how are we on time?
No, we're good. We're good.
We got some
plenty.
time, right?
Yeah, we got time.
To finish off on the Muppets, it was a Sid Bernstein gig. He came to us with certain things. The band that he was managing was the Young Rascals. So Sid only managed the Young Rascals and then the brothers, the Delia brothers. That was his stable.
Yeah.
And I think that there were certain things that the Rascals had gotten so big that we got some of their overflow. And that may very well have been one of those situations, and just went in and wrote the thing, banged out the spot, and went into a studio, recorded it, and it was on Ed Sullivan the following week. So that was cool. Yeah.
You've had such a variety of experiences. When you came out here to Montauk with Abel, and then you met. When did you meet PJ, your wife?
That was '95.
Okay.
So it's real. It's like 25 years ago.
And you have a son.
Actually, 26.
And you have a son.
Yeah, so we have a son. Yeah, and we.
Does he play, or I'm curious?
And Jake. Jake is our son. He would be 24 now. He's a meteorologist.
That's great.
He is a brilliant guy and a wonderful kid. And at age 10, it would have been, was not playing, and he grew up in a house with all of these instruments.
I was curious.
And all this music going on all the time. And I knew that he liked music a lot, but he wasn't gravitating at all to playing, right? And I can remember when he turned 10, seeing him in front of the TV with one of these Guitar Hero rigs. And I'm thinking, this is really pathetic. You know, the son of a musician, and he's got
Playing a video
because it's
game.
not an instrument, it's
a
a toy,
controller.
basically. And I said, this is really bad. I think this is my my cue to maybe try to teach him. So I said, look, dude, this is what we'll do. We'll sit at the piano. I had this concept that, and I still have this, that if you supervise practice, if you took a non-player who had some ability, right, who had some talent, and did the way you would work with gymnastics kid, every day you're coaching them. If you do that with music, if you supervise the practice, you could probably teach somebody who was musical very quickly, like in a year, if it was, or 2 years.
Putting in the hours,
They could be playing pretty good. If it was like every day, okay, at 5 o'clock we sit down for an hour and practice, and I'll show you what to do. It's like a lesson every day, coaching, right? So that was my concept. So I said, okay, dude, here's the iPhone. We're going to set it for 10 minutes, and we're going to start. And we did, by the book. And I'm telling you, in a year, he was playing that. He played it better than I'm playing it, right? And I can remember, Harry, after like 2 years, like I'd be sitting there, and because I did this coach thing with him, right? I remember sitting there. I said, okay, because now I'm not sitting next to him. I'm in the kitchen making coffee. I'm going, okay, play the Clementi. And he would wail through it just because he had to, right? This was maybe 18 months into playing. Wow. He was really playing. And it was with a limited amount of coaching. So the way we did it was every day. We never missed a single day. And started with 10 minutes timed. And then we increased it to 12, to 15, to 18. I think we had it up to about 25 minutes before it got to the point where it was too difficult to get this kid to sit to the piano, even though he was playing beautifully.
Clearly, yeah, he had the talent. My goodness, he has the talent, and of course, musical family.
Yeah, no,
with
he had
the
talent, and he did not have the passion to play it. He probably didn't want to play classical music, but there was something about his personality where he liked that it was written, and he could read music. I mean, in a year's time, he could read almost as well as I can read, and I'm not the best reader in the world, but he could.
Does he still play?
And I haven't heard him play. I think after.
Well, he found his lane in meteorology, and it sounds like he's doing very well.
After about the third year, it was too damn hard to get this guy at the.
Do you enjoy teaching though? It sounds like you do. Have you taught piano? I'd imagine that.
Yeah. I
I
love teaching. I have a few students. I think I had more before the pandemic. I think when the pandemic kicked in, it was like suddenly everything, of course, stopped. And then we had some Zoom sessions, which were not. It's not a great match for piano teaching because the audio isn't good. But if it's a student that really wants to learn, I can make it work. I gave a lesson yesterday to a kid who is just progressing so well. So it's really about the motivation. If the student has the motivation to do it, you can get around the technical obstacles. But
we do want that much time. I want a couple topics I want to go over before we get to, because I do want to talk about the past year and everything that kind of when it shut down with Siberia and the film. But I am curious. You've worked with so many different musicians in the studio, like Bruce Springsteen and others. What is that like when they first bring you in? Is it intimidating at first, or how does that work?
It can be intimidating with Bruce. I mean, we've known him for so long, and I've been friends with musicians in his band, especially Max, for
That's right.
since the early days, right? So there's been a connection, and also the 914 studio connection. So there's been sort of this history, and there's a family history with Bruce. We know him quite well, and I haven't worked with him that much, but I have worked with him.
Yeah.
I've played gigs with him, and he's come up and played with us. But we did. It was, I don't know how long ago, maybe 5 or 6 or 8 years ago. There was a thing at the Beacon Theater, and it was stand up for, I should know what.
Stand Up for Heroes, I think, or was it?
Yeah, right, exactly. And I got called to play whatever the tune was, and I can't remember. It was a couple of songs with Bruce. And I think Max must have been playing drums, and it was a big kind of band. And it was because you're playing one song or two songs, and you're waiting all day to do it. And I'm telling you, Harry, the green room, the backstage, it was like Bill Clinton. We're sharing stage with Bill Clinton
No
and
pressure.
Ricky Gervais
Oh
and
my gosh.
Jim Gaffigan. These are, and up from there,
Yeah.
just the biggest people that you could imagine. So there's a certain amount of intimidation there, but you're waiting to go on with Bruce. And then you have like one, you hit that stage and you have one shot at making it great. And you do, the training it kicks in, the red light goes on and you somehow.
Almost can't think about it. The fact
Yeah,
that
yeah, right.
It's
You
fun
have to-
watching. In the past, he did a documentary recently about his last record, and it just seemed like he was having fun in the house, in the studio with his friends. What would surprise you about working with Bruce?
With Bruce,
Like the people wouldn't know that would be surprised by.
one thing that's really cool about playing with Bruce is that when he comes up and sits in with the band, like Stone Pony stuff, which he's famous for doing, he can make any band sound great just by appearing there. Like suddenly, every musician on the stage
Everyone raises their game.
raises their game like 1,000%.
That's crazy.
Just instantly, and nobody makes a mistake. Everybody plays great, and he just has a power. He is a rock and roll powerhouse, and he knows what stuff to call, and it's great. So there've been a number of those Stone Pony kind of things. Not that I'm not a South Jersey guy, but because of my history with Max, we've played down there and have had Bruce show up at that as well. But
You've put yourself in this position to kind of do so many different things. What's your, I don't want to say your first love, but what's the one thing that you always go back to that kind of calms you or isn't work to you when you play the piano, or what do you really enjoy doing the most?
that's a really good question. I think that it's all related to music. Because I'm looking at music now, and because everything is so different from
Yes.
the way it was. So it's not all about music. Is not all about profession, or I think of myself as an amateur as much as a pro. I really do. I think that if you're doing it, the days of writing a really good song and getting it out it's different from when I came up. So I think you have to be able to write a song that the bottom line is that it's for your own satisfaction and for your own good, for your own well-being. So that's kind of an amateur concept. The amateur is the one who does things for the love of it, right? So I made some of it was what I was saying about Bach. I'm not going to be on the stage at Carnegie Hall playing Bach, but I can certainly play it and
you enjoy doing it.
and enjoy doing it. So I think most of the things that I really like to do, other than the usual, watching movies and reading books and lying on the beach once in a while in Montauk, revolve around music. And it might be songwriting, that if I write a song saying maybe it will never be heard by anybody, but if it's good and if I know it's good, And if it's only for me, maybe that's enough.
What's it like to be a musician over these years and watch it now where you're watching the new crop of musicians make music in their bedroom, literally, with the Billie Eilishes of the world, those projects
I think it's great. We don't want to be. I don't want to be subject to old fogeyism and saying, "Wow, that sucks," because it's. I might not get it, and I might not know how to do it. In a way.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't understand it, but I may not get it.
Yeah.
I came from a period where, we're talking about in rock and roll, starting back with Elvis and Fats Domino, Little Richard, then into the 60s, we had Beatles, Stones, the Animals, Yardbirds, all of this great stuff, Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Doors, all of stuff that we grew up on. After that, it was kind of like, what else is there?
Yeah, you got to see kind of grow and
where do you
build.
go from there?
Is there anything out there today that you're enjoying, or that you kind of going through some of the newer stuff?
My son Jake turns me on to bands, right? And I think the genre is more emo and screamo, as they say it. And I dig it because why I dig it? Because it's his music.
Yeah.
So I'll listen to it. He'll say, "You got to hear this." There's one band, pianos become the teeth. And I've actually seen these guys play.
Yeah.
And this is like typical of the kind of acts and bands that he knows these guys are touring all over the country. We don't know who they are. If you're over 25, but it's indie, underground stuff, and it's wild music, Brand New is one that he liked. That's a little more mainstream, and than the Nationals, I think, are more mainstream, even though it's kind of underground. I'm trying to sound hip here.
No, I'm curious because you've seen it really when you started, and like you said, you were pre-Beatles, and then everything changed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool that you have this perspective on it.
Yeah, right.
To see. I want to talk, as we quickly wrap up in just a few minutes here, the past year certainly has been interesting with everything. What have you been doing? I know you were writing a lot and playing with Cliff Black.
Well, yeah, Cliff and I are doing, we're writing and recording, and we're doing it for, we would love to have a million hits on YouTube, right? Or whatever the standard is now. But I think that we both, and we're writing, I think, really good music, but we're cognizant of the fact that it's very difficult to get heard. Yeah. It's really tough to get heard. And I think especially if you're over 25 years old, because those guys know how to get heard. We don't really.
No, it's second nature. They're used to just uploading.
It's a generational thing, and it's one of the wonderful things I think about playing out here, because we have a small community of creative people and also of audience. So you can get, we have found all of us have found a nice audience out here. It's not all bad. It's really good. And for me to have an audience at all for the songs is great. I love it.
I read that you actually learned to play the accordion over the pandemic.
I did pick up.
How did that work?
I bought an accordion a year ago, right? And it's funny because the film that we just completed, this is a segue, but it's a good one into it. It's called Zeros and Ones, starring Ethan Hawke, and it just got finished. It's just wrapping now, and it will be premiering, I'm sure, in one of the big festivals this summer. We're just waiting to hear it. And it's on its way out. It's really a cool film. It has a kind of a military and thriller narrative to it, right? And in the early cues, you're asking about process. When 2 months before they started shooting, and I had script in hand, and I was like, I got to come up with something. And I had the accordion now. This was like last October. I'll tell you this really quick. Yeah. I just mic'd up the accordion and put this whole kind of ethereal, very dark bed. It was just off the page of the script, right? And I started working the accordion into it, but in a very kind of unusual, untraditional accordion way. And these cues, even though I started writing it well before they even started shooting, when you see the final cut of the film, you'll hear that accordion in there. And it's not traditional in that sense.
Kind of came full circle. Your brother played the accordion, and now you are.
And exactly. And a year ago, I was out there shedding on I was in Montauk. I would sit in my little tomato garden with the accordion and squeeze it and figure out how to play it.
Well, this is great. Joe, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Great.
I really appreciate it. We have a couple minutes. Do you want to play us out?
I'll play it.
What would you like to do?
How much time do we have?
We got a couple of minutes, so go for it.
We got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, let's do a song.
Okay, so it's either Under the Montauk Moon, but that's 4 minutes. I'll play a little, you know what I'll play is, I'll play a little Boogie Woogie. This is Kicking and Screaming. And you give me, when we're about 20 seconds out, you give me the high side.
Will do. So, Joe, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you. Well, a black cat dragged me in last night. I nearly fell out on the bed. Another night of drunk and sin, another morning with a burning head. Whatever happened to a friend today? You know I'm feeling kind of strange. Better take it easy now, child, or nothing gonna change. Mama, it's alright. Sometimes I feel like a dog on a prayer looking for a bitch to hate. Sometimes I feel like throwing a towel, all so bittersweet. Living in a suburban house, holed up in a cave. Better gonna keep on kicking till the dancing on my grave. Ain't no way to go down easy, no way to go down slow. Keep burning down the candle, way down low. Know the clock is ticking, you know it ain't my friend. Go down kicking and screaming, a kicking and a screaming, a kicking and a screaming. A mama till the bitter end. How we doing, Harry?
Very good. Thank you so much, Joe Delia. Terrific. Sounds amazing. And
Thank you,
a lot of
Harry.
fun getting to know you. Thank you for doing Homegrown here
Wow,
on LTV.
awesome.
Thank you so much. Have a great night. Thank you.